Welcome back. We're going to take a look at the complete Old Indian in this opening repertoire series. So, in the last video, we looked at how to play the Phillidor. And the Phillidor is a great opening to play against 1e4. If you want a structure to match the Phillidor, we can keep in mind that the Phillidor variation is going to look something like this, and gradually we get to a position to where we're going to play c6, and a6. So if you want to use this position for everything, you can. You can even play it for white. So let's look at how we can play this exact structure for black against everything, and we're going to talk about the typical plans as we go and look at all the variations that white can throw at you. So starting from move 1, if white throws the English at you, let's see how we can get to an Old Indian structure. And it is not too difficult. We see the startings of the structure forming, and we're already there. And we see gradually how bishop e7, castle, c6, and a6 will be played. Next, let's see move 1, knight f3. Well, again, e5, and we have our position. None of this is overly difficult. Understanding the concept of transposing, you can literally use the Old Indian and this structure that we see in the Phillidor and Old Indian against anything that white can throw at you, making it one of the most universal structures in chess. So let's see d4, after knight f6, c4, d6, knight c3, e5. Now, this is the first branching point. We can look at two of the major variations of the Old Indian, with the exchange variation and the fianchetto variation. So after he takes, we see a line very, very similar to our Phillidor structure. And keep in mind that the most optimal structure for black is to be able to play f6 and c6, and this is to keep the white knights out of your position. So the very first move to protect the e-pawn is to move our knight out of the way to be able to play f6 and get the optimal structure. If knight g5, we're not concerned. And if knight d5, you simply defend the two squares where he could have had the fork. And now in this position, there's no way for white to increase the attack on either the f7 or c7 pawns. So in the next two moves, we get the moves we wanted anyway with tempo. f6 to kick the g5 knight, and c6 to kick the d5 knight. So, going back, instead of knight g5, a better move on move 7 would be bishop d2. f6, c6, and we're going to castle by hand, eventually putting the king either on c7 or going back to e8. In this case, black went back to e8, and I will only go a few more moves in this line just to emphasize that white has overextended some, black has no weaknesses, and black's position is gradually going to get more annoying for white to deal with here. I feel that the exchange variation is something that a lot of players go, ooh, I can trade queens, and then they go right for it, thinking you can't castle, so you've got to be worse. But based off the ideas that we work on in class, I really feel like we have an advantage in these types of positions. So going back to move 3, instead of the exchange variation, let's look at the main line with knight f3. We will cover the absolute main line after this line. After g3, we find that this is the fianchetto variation. And it's the first time we are seeing our full structure with a6, the exact same as the Phillidor. And now we begin our plan. The fianchetto is a little bit different than the rest of the variations that we're going to talk about, because the fianchetto is very solid. So we're going to have to use positional concepts. Now, we want to get our bad piece out here. It's bad simply because it's undeveloped and inactive. So typically it's going to develop to b7. Now, White, understanding this principle, can stop you from playing b5 and getting a lot of space. For instance, if he plays the move h3, we'll play b5, and on our next move, we'll play bishop b7. So, after a6, if he plays a4, he's officially stopped b5. And we're going to use the same idea as we see in the Phillidor videos, a5. And we're going to secure a square. The b4 square is now black's. A knight or bishop could definitely be going to that square later with good effect, and no pawn can kick him out of that square. So after h3, we take on d4, and we play knight c5. And now we see the strength of this move, because this knight cannot be kicked out, because the d4 pawn is gone, and the b4 pawn can't come to b4. Or the b file pawn cannot go to b4, rather. So after bishop e3, we simply play rook e8 and queen b6, a French-like maneuver where we are focusing on controlling the key squares. We've yet to determine the best square for this bishop, but overall, I feel like black has a very satisfactory position. So let's go back to move 3 and start talking about more of our main line concepts, the moves you're going to see more often. So if e4, it will transpose to this line with d5. We play knight bd7, and after e4, we begin to see some of the main ideas. And like I said, this will transpose from many variations. So going back, if we play knight f3, this idea that we just saw with securing the c5 square for the knight is very important to remember, because if you place the knight on c5 right now, white will simply kick with the b4 push, and then our knight has to go right back and we've given white space. So it's very important to remember this move a5. And after e4, knight c5. And notice immediately how both knights are linking up to hit the e4 pawn, so white has to do something to defend it. One of the typical moves is knight d2, and after bishop e7, bishop e2. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the two plans in the position. There's only two plans in a locked pawn structure. The pawns are locked, therefore our play is going to be on the wings. The two pawn breaks that we have at our disposal are f5 and c6. Now if white's king castles kingside, we're playing for the f5 break. If white's king castles queenside, we're playing for the c6 break. In opposite side castling positions, you must throw your pawns at the opponent's king in order to rip his position open and try to checkmate him, because that's what he's going to be doing to you. So, after castles, we see this move g4, because white knows what's coming, the f5 break, so he's trying to play against that. So, we play knight e8. One of the ideas of this good maneuver with knight e8 is to be able to eventually, if we're trying to play for the f5 break, play g6, knight g7 to have another supporter, because we'll have the bishop on c8, and then the knight on g7, and the pawn on g6, all helping to complete the f5 break. Another idea is that this is our bad bishop. It's trapped behind the locked pawn structure in the center. We're wanting simply to play bishop g5 to trade off our bad bishop for his good bishop. So after knight f1, we see bishop g5. We got rid of our bad bishop. And after queen h4, I'll end this line because we've seen some of the typical ideas, and black clearly has an annoying place for his queen, and there's no real attack coming. So in this position, we're eventually looking for bishop d7, c6 b5, or g6, knight g7, f5 in order to get a good game. So going back, after e4, knight c5, both knights are hitting the e4 pawn again. So there's multiple ways to defend the pawn. Let's start with bishop g5. This is actually a mistake, because after the simple move bishop e7, let's say if Now white goes, well, I'm going to defend my pawn. This is actually a blunder. Pause the video real quick and find the tactic. Okay? To win a pawn here, you can play the move knight takes d5. If he plays bishop takes bishop, we'll take back with our knight that's being attacked. And if he takes the knight in any way, we take his bishop. So either way, we've won a pawn. So in this position, white has to trade off his bishop. He gets a tempo on our knight, but I'm not too frustrated because we still have our other typical break, f5, in the position for good play. So keep in mind, I'm going to keep repeating this over and over in the video. When the center is locked, we must play on the wing, so we're looking for the c6 or f5 break, and it's depending upon where white's king is at. So going back to this position after knight c5, we see queen c2, defending the e4 pawn. a5, securing our knight. We see this theme over and over. We don't want our pieces to get kicked around unless it's absolutely necessary or we're winning something. h3, castles, b6, and now white is signifying with this move that he's initiating his attack on the king side and he's castling queen side. So we need to start our actions on the queen side. So he puts his bishop on d7, getting the last piece developed, and controlling some key squares over here. He's thinking about potential c6 and b5 attacks on the pawn structure, because when those pawns are gone, it makes his king more vulnerable. He castles queenside, and we already begin our attack. You have to have a sense of urgency in this position, because white's attack is going to come very simply. He's going to put the bishop on e2, this rook's going to come to g1, and he's going to keep pushing these pawns with effect to try to rip open your king. So if you just wait around, if you fumble around and don't do anything actively in this position, attacking him on the queen side where you're supposed to be, you're going to get ripped open and you're going to lose. So you must have a sense of urgency right now. a4. Already starting to attack and probe weaknesses on the queen side. After bishop e2, a3. We're trying to get the pawns to move closer to us. If he takes, of course, it opens up an a-file. Very, very easy to go with. If he doesn't take, it's going to be easier for our pieces to attack. So now we need to start concentrating on eventually making a c6 break, maneuvering our pieces around to attack. So first he plays knight a6. Really like this move because we have the flexibility to go to b4 or to come back to c5, depending upon what things happen. So after knight e1, what's the break that we need? c6. And now if g5, our knight goes back to its great square on e8. And after h4, we have a very double-edged move. We do our other break, f5. If he takes, we take back with the bishop. And after c5, this position is unclear, but very, very interesting for both players. I would definitely prefer black. So in the main game after c6, white elected to take d takes c6. And this game with black was played by Grandmaster Akopian, A-K-O-P-I-A-N. He is one of the foremost experts of the Old Indian in the world, as well as Grandmaster Zapata, which I played the fianchetto variation against Zapata in the 2014 Emery Castle Grand Prix, and he absolutely stomped me. So I definitely have a lot of respect for this opening in those two players. So after bishop takes c6, f3, you must attack where you're stronger on the queen side, knight d7. Now, we have this maneuvering occurring to where you've got to use the key squares. This knight may go to b4, both knights may go to c5, a knight maneuver may happen where a knight comes to c5 to e6. There's a lot of flexibility in the position with the knights. The knights are really the only thing that have some workability, so we're going to use them. After queen d2, white's gradually building up his attack. He's getting ready to throw these pawns. So, sense of urgency. Knight c5, knight e6. Now this knight is super flexible. It's a perfect octopus in the position, being able to have lots of options. And after knight d5, this was the decision first in the game that if you don't act now, white's winning. Takes, takes. So If I asked you right now, what is white's good bishop and white's bad bishop? And what do you do? If the knight goes to c5, I think white just has a commanding advantage because he's got all of his pieces ready to attack. He's just going to push the pawn forwards and win. If you ask what is the good bishop and what's the bad bishop, this is white's bad bishop because it does not have much maneuverability because every single one of white's pawns are on light squares. This is his good bishop because it agrees with the pawn structure. Together, they attack more squares. So I want to get rid of his bishop for mine. My bishop is really doing nothing, and it's stuck looking at the same color as all of the key pawns are on the same color as that bishop. So black comes up with this great idea, a pawn sacrifice, playing knight d4. And after takes, he loses a pawn, but he's able to make an offer that white can't refuse. If this bishop moves away, our bishop will get the really excellent square on b2, being right around the king, with a lot of potential attacking threats around the king later. So after king b1, we're able to get rid of our bad bishop. And after queen g5, we can see black has sacrificed a pawn, and he's definitely gotten compensation due to his control over the dark squares. First, I'll remind you of that awful bishop on e2, and the fact that our knight is going to be so strong. Now, white's attack is going to come. So, when I look at this position to try to find a plan, it comes to me pretty quickly that if white's attacking on the king side, where should we be attacking? Fill in the blank. Right, on the queen side, going after his king. Opposite side castling, we go after his king. So the plan in this position for black is to distract white and get an attack going versus his king directly. And the thing that sticks out to me most is this open c-file. So if both of my rooks are piled up on the c-file and my queen's also working, we could definitely have a big attack. White's also going to be trying to push. Do we want to trade queens? Akopian thought not in the game. After h5, we begin the plan. Got to slow down white. Now, this next move I considered double-edged, but Akopian showed in the game how f6 is a very strong move. And after f4, rook a5, with the idea of saving time, instead of slowly doubling up by putting the rook up and rook over, we play rook a5 and rook c5, which is much more critical. After rook g to g1, which I feel was a mistake, we have rook ac5. Now black gets control over the c-file, and the advantage has slipped from white. After bishop g4, pause the video because we have another tactical opportunity. What do you do? Hopefully you found rook c1 check, exclam, because either way you're going to be winning the queen. And the resulting position is going to be two rooks versus the queen. But the best piece working with the queen is a knight. And white's bishop still isn't all that great. In positions, in in-game positions, where it's two rooks versus the queen, the rooks are better when the rooks are better when the king that belongs to the two rooks is safe and the rooks can work together to attack weaknesses. The inverse happens when the queen is better. The rooks are uncoordinated, the king is unsafe, and the queen is able to attack a number of weaknesses. So Akopian was able to evaluate that the queen would be better in the resulting position. The black king is safe. He's threatening checkmate, so we got to stop that. After queen e3, many things are being attacked. After rook f1, knight c5, check. And after knight e4, many different threats are being popped up to where I'll be able to check him in a way that he's going to have to sacrifice the rook for the knight, and then it'll be very easy to checkmate. So some maneuvering occurs. and after king f6, getting off the pin, knight f2, exclam move, disconnecting the rook from defending b2, and there's really no way to stop checkmate. White tries to run, but the problem is it's still checkmate anyway. So to recap what we've seen in the video, first you learn the structure. Phillidor, Old Indian, can be played against anything. You can even play this with white, starting with moves like knight f3, d3, knight bd2, e4. You can use this structure against absolutely everything. When you get the structure, if the center is locked, we're playing on the wings. I cannot emphasize that enough. We're looking to break the center based off of where the defending white king is going. c6 to attack the center if he's castled on the queen side, and f5 to attack the center if he's castled on the king side. Hopefully this video has been very instructive and helpful.